Hey guys, what's going on? Shyam Kumar here, the Minister of Everything. Today I'm going to teach you how to focus your Leica M camera to take a lovely picture of a landscape. Stay tuned. Okay, so welcome back. What we're looking at is my Leica M240 with a 50mm f2.0 Summicron lens on it. Now I don't want to hear that I don't have a wide angle lens to take a landscape shot. You don't need to do that. You could pretty much use any lens you want to and just walk the appropriate distance forward and backwards to get your landscape in view. Now as you can see, there are distance scales on this camera, and I went over what these mean in part 1 of my video. If you haven't seen it, link in the description down below. Check it out first before you come back. Now, in order for you to take a landscape picture, all you have to do is figure out what aperture you want to be on. Now, generally speaking, in a good light setting, anything above 5.6 is generally a good starting point for taking a nice landscape photograph. Now, the higher your number, the more depth of field you're going to get, and the better your photo is going to look, especially if you're doing landscape. Now, it may not always be able to do f16 handheld. In which case you could put it on a tripod and go for a longer shutter time so your photo is nice and exposed and bright. So the higher the number, the better it is. But again, you don't have to put it on f16 to get a beautiful landscape photograph. Now, the easiest way to focus your lens whenever you're on any aperture when you're using a Leica M camera is simply choose the aperture, and we chose f16. And all you have to do is find f16, the distance, the aperture number on the right hand side of your lens when you're looking down on it, and put the infinity distance mark on top of that aperture, in this case f16. Now what this will allow you to do is going to allow you to take advantage of the hyperfocal distance, which will give you the maximum range of things in focus given any aperture. So for this aperture f16, we put the infinity focus mark on f16 because that's the aperture we're using. And if you follow this number 16 all the way to the other side, you'll see in the yellow numbers there that your distance starts at somewhere just before 8 foot, so about almost 8 feet, maybe 7.8 or whatever. What that means is everything from 7.8 to as far as the lens can see will be in focus. Now this gives you the maximum range of things in focus given a certain aperture. Now if I were to go to f11, all I would do is put my infinity mark on the 11 mark on the right hand side of my barrel, and if you follow back to the 11 on the other side, you'll see that it lies somewhere past 10 feet. Now what that means is your close distance that'll be in focus will start at approximately 11 feet and go all the way to infinity. Now I think you're seeing a pattern here, and you should already know this if you're a manual Leica M photographer, that the larger the aperture, the more things that'll be in focus. Not only things far away from you, but also things closer to you. So the larger your aperture number is, so if you go from 11 to 16, you see automatically I'm getting more things in focus that are closer to me than if I were at f11. At f11 it went to somewhere like 11 feet, but with f16 things closer to me will be in focus as well. That's basically the premise of using hyperfocal focusing for your photography, in this case landscapes. You must consider what's close to you that's going to be in focus as well, because there's nothing more awful than a photograph where the landscape looks beautiful but the foreground is out of focus. It really distracts you from the photograph, and it's just not simply a good photograph. So think about what's close to you before you take these pictures. Now the other cool fact that I'm going to tell you about is that, so let's go back to 16, and okay, so we're focused on hyperfocal f16. My infinity scales are touching the f16 mark, which means I'm taking the most advantage of this lens in terms of the range it provides for keeping things in focus. Now that I've done that, if you look down the center mark here where it says 2, whatever is in front of that in terms of distance will be the sharpest part of that photograph. So in this case it's about 15 feet. So for this aperture, this length of a lens, 50mm, this is the hyperfocal distance, which is about 15 feet. You don't need to memorize this because you have scales. But I just want you to understand that how it works is whatever that sweet spot is, if you divide that number by half, it'll show you how close you could get in terms of things closer to you. So for f16, it's about 15 feet. That's known as the hyperfocal distance for this aperture, for this length of lens, okay? And this full frame camera. Now, as you can see, for that, it starts at 7.5 feet. It'll always be, whatever your hyperfocal distance is, the closest distance to you will roughly be half of what your hyperfocal distance is. Now, you don't have to memorize any of that. All you have to do is put your lens on infinity to the corresponding aperture, and everything else will work itself out. That's all you got to worry about. Just to demonstrate to you one more time, f11. So the hyperfocal distance for this is about 25, a little less than that. Divide that by 2, and it's about 11 or 12. So whatever that number is, it's half of that. So this is really cool to know. So if you want to take things, take pictures of things with a lot of details in it, as in everything in the foreground as close to you as possible, then the larger the aperture, the better, in which case the tripod comes in handy. Now, the other cool thing about going hyperfocal is that you could just use this trick at any aperture, and you're taking advantage of the full spectrum of range provided to you for that particular aperture simply by moving the infinity scale to that aperture. The only time you're going to have to memorize something is when you're going to f2.0. Let's say you're running out of daylight, you're at Yosemite National Park, you got to have this picture, you got to open your lens up wide. Not ideal for taking a landscape, but guess what? You rather have the picture than not have the picture. So you're running out of light, you don't have a tripod, you're opening up your aperture to f2.0, and you want to capture as much as possible. And you're putting your infinity mark on f2.0. Now, does this mean that you're going to get as much range possible for that aperture? Absolutely. The same rule applies, except there's no distance marker available for you at f2.0, unfortunately. What you have to do in this case is basically get an app. It's called a Hyperfocal app. There's many available for you, whether you're using Apple or you're using an Android phone. There are 1,000 apps out there. Just type in Hyperfocal distance calculator and you should get many apps. Download an app and program in a full frame camera with a 50mm lens and find out what your hyperfocal distance is for f2.0. So I downloaded an app off an Android store for my Android phone. I'll leave the link in the description down below, along with a link for an Apple phone as well, so you're not excluded. And I plugged in to that particular app the 50mm focal length of my lens, that's up here, and I put in the aperture f2.0, and it calculated for me what my hyperfocal distance is. Now, according to this, 141.9, 141.9 feet is my hyperfocal distance, which means 142. 142 divided by 2 equals to 71. What that means is 71 is what the number would be on the left side of my lens if it had distance scales for infinity at f2.0 on my lens. Since it doesn't, everything from 71 feet all the way to 142 feet, which is what my app calculated, will be in focus. So as you can see, it's really easy to take a picture of a landscape. All you need to do is find out what the hyperfocal distance is for your widest aperture setting. So if you have a camera lens for Leica M that's, your widest open aperture is 1.4, download the app and find out what the hyperfocal distance is for that particular aperture given the lens that you have. If you divide that number by 2, it'll tell you the distance of the closest thing to your camera that's going to be in focus. So everything from 70 all the way to infinity is going to be in focus. In my case, 71 feet. It's going to be basically everything from 71 feet to infinity will be in focus. And again, in a pinch, handheld, low light, you could still use f2.0. So you can use any aperture really to take a landscape photograph. All you have to do is rely on your hyperfocal distance lens calculator that's available right on your lens barrel to calculate the distance you need to make sure you have everything in focus. Thanks for watching. Next episode, I'm going to be doing a series on how to basically use your hyperfocal lenses to take pictures of people in good light in outdoor setting while they're stationary as well as when they're moving. Please check out my first video as well, and I'll see you all next time. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and comment. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.